There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a thought enters your mind and you accept it without question. You don't examine it, you don't challenge it, you simply believe it. And in that instant, something powerful happens. Because not every thought you think is truly yours. Some thoughts arrive like whispers in the dark, subtle, persuasive, almost comforting. Others come like accusations, sharp and relentless, echoing fears you didn't know you had. But what if I told you that the battlefield of your life is not outside, but inside your mind? And what if the greatest deception is not what the world says about you, but what you believe about yourself? The Apostle Paul, writing from a prison cell, understood this battle more deeply than most. In the letter known as Epistle to the Philippians, he delivers a command that seems simple at first glance, but holds the key to spiritual survival. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Philippians 4:8. Think about such things, not feel them, not wish them. Think, because Paul knew something we often forget. Your thoughts are not neutral. They are either building you or destroying you. And the most dangerous thoughts are the ones you never question. Imagine this. You wake up in the morning, and before your feet even touch the ground, a thought crosses your mind. You're not enough. It feels familiar, almost like it belongs there. But where did it come from? Was it born from truth or planted by something else? Another thought follows. You'll never change. Then another. God is disappointed in you. By the time you begin your day, your spirit is already weighed down, not by reality, but by a narrative you didn't consciously choose. This is how the unseen war begins. Scripture reveals that the mind is not just a place of reasoning, it is a gateway. In 2 Corinthians 10:5, Paul writes about taking every thought captive to obey Christ. Why would he say that, unless some thoughts are enemies disguised as your own voice? Let that sink in. Not every thought that sounds like you is you. From the very beginning, this has been the enemy's strategy. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent didn't attack Eve with force. He introduced a thought. Did God really say? That single question planted doubt, and doubt gave birth to distortion, and distortion led to disobedience. It all started with a thought, and it still does. The enemy doesn't need to control your actions if he can influence your thinking, because your life will always move in the direction of your strongest thoughts. If you believe you are unworthy, you will live as if you are. If you believe you are alone, you will isolate yourself, even when surrounded by love. If you believe God has abandoned you, you will stop seeking him. But here is the terrifying truth. Many of these beliefs were never yours to begin with. They were introduced, repeated, reinforced, until they felt like identity. Paul, chained in a Roman prison, understood suffering. He understood pressure, fear, uncertainty. Yet instead of surrendering to despair, he gave a command that defies human instinct. Choose your thoughts. Not based on circumstances, not based on emotions, but based on truth. Whatever is true. Truth, not perception. Whatever is noble. Not what degrades you, but what lifts your soul toward God. Whatever is right, aligned with God's character, not your temporary feelings. Whatever is pure, free from corruption, fear, and hidden agendas. Whatever is lovely, admirable. These are not random suggestions. They are filters. And without filters, your mind becomes vulnerable territory. Think of your mind as a house. Every thought is a visitor. Some come to strengthen you. Others come to destroy you from within. But here's the question. No one asks, why do we let every thought walk in without checking who sent it? You wouldn't open your door to a stranger in the middle of the night. Yet in your mind, you allow voices to enter freely. Voices that accuse, condemn, and deceive. And over time, those voices begin to sound like your own. This is where spiritual discernment becomes essential, because the voice of truth and the voice of deception don't always sound different at first. Both can be subtle, both can be convincing, but one leads to life, and the other slowly drains it. Jesus said in John 10:10 that the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But how does he steal? How does he destroy? Not always through dramatic events, Often, through thoughts. A single thought can steal your peace. Another can kill your confidence. Another can destroy your faith. And if left unchecked, these thoughts begin to shape your reality. You start interpreting everything through them. A delay becomes rejection. A mistake becomes proof of failure. Silence becomes abandonment. But what if the interpretation is wrong? What if the thought itself is the lie? Paul's instruction in Philippians 4:8 is not about positive thinking. It is about disciplined thinking. It is about refusing to let your mind become a battlefield you are unaware of. Because ignoring the battle doesn't stop the war. It only guarantees defeat. Now consider this. Why would Paul emphasize thinking so strongly? Because transformation doesn't begin with behavior. It begins with the mind. Romans 12:2 says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind," not your circumstances, not your environment, your mind. Because until your thinking changes, your life will remain trapped in the same patterns. You can pray for change. You can desire change. But if your thoughts remain rooted in lies, your life will reflect those lies. This is why the enemy fights so hard for your attention. Because what you focus on, you eventually become. If your mind is filled with fear, your life will reflect fear. If your mind is filled with doubt, your faith will weaken. If your mind is filled with truth, something powerful begins to shift. Peace enters, clarity returns, strength rises. But here is where it gets even more unsettling. Some thoughts don't feel negative. They feel logical, reasonable, even justified. And those are often the most dangerous. Because deception rarely presents itself as evil. It presents itself as truth twisted just enough to mislead. For example, I'm just being realistic. But underneath that thought is hopelessness. I'm protecting myself. But underneath is fear. I've always been this way. But underneath is resignation. And over time, these thoughts build invisible prisons. You don't see the bars, but you live inside them. Paul, writing from an actual prison, was freer in his mind than many people are today, because his thoughts were anchored in truth, not circumstance. He didn't deny reality. He reinterpreted it through faith. And that changes everything. Imagine facing your darkest moment, not with denial, but with clarity. Not with fear, but with truth. Not with despair, but with a mind aligned to God. That is the power of Philippians 4:8. But it requires something difficult: awareness. You must become aware of your thoughts, not just passively experiencing them, but actively examining them. Because the moment you begin to question your thoughts, you weaken their power. Ask yourself, is this thought true? Is it aligned with God's word? Is it leading me toward life or away from it? And if the answer is no, then why are you believing it? This is where many people struggle, because letting go of a thought feels like losing a part of yourself, even if that thought is hurting you. Because familiarity creates attachment, even to pain. But truth requires surrender. It requires you to release what feels natural in order to embrace what is eternal. And that process is not comfortable, because your mind will resist. It will try to pull you back into old patterns, old beliefs, old narratives. But every time you choose truth over deception, something shifts. The chains weaken, the fog begins to lift, and slowly, you begin to see clearly. But here's the tension. What happens when the thoughts don't stop? What happens when the negative voices keep returning, louder, stronger, more persistent? What do you do when you know the truth, but your mind keeps drifting back into darkness? This is where the battle intensifies. Because awareness alone is not enough. You must replace what is false with what is true. And that requires intention. It requires discipline. It requires spiritual focus. Paul didn't say avoid bad thoughts. He said, think about these things. Meaning, your mind cannot be empty. It must be filled with truth. Because an empty mind becomes an open door, and whatever enters will take root. So the question is not whether you are thinking. The question is, what are you choosing to dwell on? Because what you dwell on will define you. And if you don't choose your thoughts deliberately, something else will choose them for you. And that is a risk you cannot afford. Because your thoughts are not just internal experiences. They are the blueprint of your life. And the battle for your mind is the battle for your soul. There comes a point in every hidden battle of the mind when knowing the truth is no longer enough. You've recognized the lies. You've felt the weight of those intrusive thoughts. You've even identified the patterns that keep pulling you back into the same darkness. But still, they return, stronger, sharper, more persistent. And in those moments, it feels like you are losing ground because the mind doesn't go silent just because you've heard the truth once. It resists. It fights back. It replays old narratives with new intensity, as if trying to convince you that nothing has really changed. And this is where many people give up. Not because they don't believe in God, but because they are exhausted from fighting thoughts they don't fully understand. But here is something you need to hear clearly. The persistence of a thought does not determine its truth. Just because it repeats doesn't mean it's real. Just because it feels strong doesn't mean it's right. And just because it sounds like your voice doesn't mean it belongs to you. This is where spiritual authority must replace passive awareness, because recognizing the battle is only the beginning. Winning it requires action. When Paul wrote in Epistle to the Philippians 4:8 to think on what is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and admirable, he wasn't offering a suggestion for peaceful living. He was giving a strategy for survival. Because if you don't intentionally direct your thoughts will direct you, and they will not lead you toward freedom. They will lead you toward whatever has the strongest influence over your mind. So how do you fight back? Not by suppressing thoughts, not by pretending they don't exist, but by confronting them with something stronger. Truth. Not your version of truth, not your feelings about truth. God's truth. Because truth is not just comforting, it is corrective. It exposes lies. It dismantles deception. It restores clarity. And most importantly, it sets you free. Jesus said in John 8:32, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." But notice this. He didn't say truth would make you comfortable. Freedom often comes after confrontation, after you realize that some of the thoughts you've trusted for years were never meant to guide you. They were meant to trap you. And breaking free from that requires more than belief. It requires discipline, because your mind has been trained, sometimes for years, to follow certain patterns: negative loops, fear-based thinking, self-condemnation, doubt. And those patterns don't disappear overnight. They must be replaced. One thought at a time. Imagine your mind as a field. For years, certain seeds have been planted, some by your experiences, some by your environment, and some by forces you didn't even recognize. And now those seeds have grown, some into fear, some into insecurity, some into silent despair. You can't just remove them and expect the field to stay empty, because if you do nothing, the weeds will grow back, stronger than before. So what do? You plant new seeds, intentionally, daily, consistently. This is what Paul was teaching, not just to avoid wrong thinking, but to replace it with something greater, whatever is true. That means when your mind says, "You're not enough," you respond with truth. "I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Psalm 139:14. When your thoughts whisper, "God has abandoned you," you answer, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Hebrews 13:5. When your mind insists, "You will never change," you declare, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation." 2 Corinthians 5:17. This is not denial. This is alignment. Alignment with what is eternal, over what is temporary. Because your feelings change, your circumstances change, but truth does not. And when your thoughts are anchored in something unchanging, you become stable, even in chaos. But let's be honest, this is not easy, because there are moments when the lies feel more real than the truth. Moments when fear feels stronger than faith. Moments when your past screams louder than God's promises. And in those moments, you have to make a choice. Will you believe what you feel, or will you trust what God has said? That choice defines everything, because faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to trust truth in the presence of it. And every time you choose truth, you weaken the power of deception, even if it doesn't feel like it immediately, even if the thoughts return again later. Because transformation is not a single moment. It is a process, a daily renewal, a continual realignment. Romans 12:2 doesn't say, be transformed once. It says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Renewing, again and again, day after day. Because your mind is constantly being influenced by what you watch, what you hear, what you focus on. And if you are not intentional, you will absorb more lies than truth without even realizing it. This is why guarding your mind is not optional. It is essential. Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else, for everything you do flows from it. Everything. Your decisions, your reactions, your relationships, your faith. It all flows from what is happening inside you. And if your thoughts are corrupted, everything downstream will be affected. But here's the hope. No matter how long you've believed certain lies, they can be broken. No matter how deeply rooted those thoughts are, they can be replaced. No matter how loud the noise in your mind has become, there is still a voice that speaks with clarity, a voice that doesn't accuse, doesn't manipulate, doesn't confuse, but leads gently, firmly, truthfully, the voice of God. And learning to recognize that voice changes everything, because God's voice will never contradict His word. It will never lead you into fear, condemnation, or hopelessness. It will convict, but not crush. It will correct, but not condemn. It will challenge, but also restore. While the enemy says, you are your mistakes, God says, you are redeemed. While the enemy says, there is no way out, God says, I will make a way. While the enemy says, you are alone, God says, I am with you always. So when those thoughts come, and they will come, you don't have to accept them. You don't have to entertain them. And you certainly don't have to believe them. You can confront them, replace them, overcome them, not by your own strength, but through truth, through discipline, through alignment with God, and slowly, something begins to change. The thoughts that once controlled you lose their power. The lies that once defined you lose their influence. And the mind that once felt like a battlefield becomes a place of peace. Not because the war has ended, but because you've learned how to fight. And more importantly, you've learned who fights with you. Because you were never meant to face this alone. The same God who calls you to renew your mind is the one who gives you the strength to do it. The same God who commands you to think on what is true is the source of that truth. And the same God who sees every hidden battle inside you is the one who promises victory. But here is the final question. What will you do with this? Because hearing truth is one thing, living it is another. Will you continue to let every thought define you? Or will you begin to question them, filter them, replace them with what God says is true? Because your life will follow your thoughts, and your thoughts will determine your direction. So choose carefully, choose intentionally, choose truth. And if this message spoke to something deep inside you, if you felt this battle in your own mind, if you're ready to stop believing every thought that comes your way, then don't let this moment pass. Take a step, right now. Subscribe to the channel, Daily Walk with Jesus, so you don't miss the next message that could strengthen your faith and renew your mind. Leave a like to help this message reach someone else who is silently fighting the same battle. And in the comments, share your thoughts. What is one thought you've struggled with that you're choosing today to replace with truth? You are not alone in this, and your mind does not have to remain a battlefield. It can become a place where truth lives, where peace grows, and where God's voice is louder than anything else.